A grim prophecy loomed over the United Kingdom of the East. It foretold that within a decade, it would be mercilessly annihilated by the infamous Five Great Sins. In a desperate attempt to stop that future, the protagonist took it upon himself to become their secret benefactor. Yet as he sat at his desk, drowning in piles of critical documents, a troubled realization weighed on him. He reflected that he had never expected things to spiral into something so massive. The scene then drifted into a lavish chamber. There, he recounted his past life as an overworked corporate slave grinding through 78 hours a week. He had been reborn as a noble in a fantasy world. By all accounts, it sounded like a dream come true. In many ways, it was. However, that illusion cracked as he struggled to decipher the unfamiliar language of this new world. It was then revealed that the book he held was upside down. This highlighted his complete ineptitude. To make matters worse, his current body belonged to an uneducated noble. He possessed no remarkable abilities whatsoever. Later, seated at the dining table, he indulged in an extravagant meal. He found it genuinely delicious. He was attended to with unwavering care. Once finished, preparations for his nightly routine followed. He was escorted to bathe before retiring. He found himself soaking in a grand tub. He was surrounded by attendants diligently tending to him. The narration emphasized that he now lived as the utterly useless heir of a count's household. He spent his days indulging in comfort and idleness. It was a life that seemed perfect on the surface. However, there was an unsettling truth. He had no understanding of where exactly he had ended up. As the night drew on, he was reminded of the impending return of his elder brothers. This detail left him quietly bewildered. He had not even been aware of their existence until that moment. The maid clarified that she was referring to young masters Leo and Tonio, and she found it strange that he spoke as if he did not recognize the Palacio family. Hearing that name, the protagonist felt a chilling sense of familiarity and began thinking deeply. And in that moment of realization, he suddenly submerged his head into the water, startling the maids around him as panic spread while he clutched his head and wondered if the world he was in was psychedelia. Psychedelia was a game he used to play during his days as a corporate slave. It was a turn-based RPG where no matter the route chosen, everything collapsed once the Five Great Sins appeared, as wrath, greed, sloth, pride, and obsession would bring the entire kingdom, its nobles, and cities into ruin. Among those doomed was the Palacio County, a family of corrupt nobles who only appeared in a side quest before being destroyed even before the main story began. Dropping to his knees, the protagonist realized he recognized this place. And, as the scenery matched exactly with the game, he began to question if this was real. Still on his knees, he realized that out of all places he had been reborn into the Palacio family, the very first to be crushed by the Five Great Sins, and that he himself was the third son, a disposable mob villain named Alone Palancho. Moments later, Alone lay on his bed as he internally begged to escape, wishing he could return to his old life, even if it meant working 78 hours a week, as he questioned the point of a rich life if he was destined to die in 10 years, feeling that this was worse than having his wages withheld for months. With tears in his eyes, he wondered why he had no special perks despite being a reincarnator, recalling how other protagonists gained powerful advantages. But as he thought about perks, he suddenly realized something and sat up, understanding that knowing the events of the game 10 years ahead was the same as knowing the future itself. From that realization, he considered whether he could remove the cause of destruction beforehand. And with that thought, Alone decided that he would try to rehabilitate the Five Great Sins in order to secure a peaceful, noble life. Alone, recalling the Five Great Sins, reasoned that they were likely still children, meaning there was still a chance to change the future even without any special abilities. 2 months later, in another scene, Yeben, his personal knight, reported that he had rescued the orphans from what appeared to be an orphanage, but was in truth a human experimentation lab in the East, and that he had placed a boy named Yusha in charge of managing it. Hearing this, Alone remarked that his judgment had been correct and acknowledged Yeben's capability, which Yeben accepted while also questioning whether it was truly a compliment due to Alone's usual expressionless face. Alone confirmed it was a compliment and attempted to smile, though it came out awkwardly, and he expressed that he would rely on Yeben moving forward, which Yeben agreed to. Later, Alone examined his reflection in the mirror and experimented with different expressions, noting that while his original face had been expressive, his current one barely conveyed any emotion. Meanwhile, Yeben, visibly pleased, expressed gratitude for the praise. In Psychedelia, where betrayal was common, Yeben was a rare top-tier character who remained loyal, and Alone had recruited him as soon as he found him. Changing the topic, Yeben asked if the raid had been for a girl named Yusha, and Alone confirmed it, prompting Yeben to remark that he could understand why his master would be cautious of her, as even with his experience as a mercenary, the child seemed far from ordinary. He observed that she was so strong that it was strange she allowed herself to be captured so easily, and he questioned why Alone had not brought her back, calling a waste, to which Alone acknowledged it as a sharp observation. Internally, Alone reflected that while it might appear wasteful, leaving her there was part of his plan. Yusha Bloodia, a member of the grotesque blood tribe, wielded power through a contract with an indescribable being and would eventually become the Sin of Wrath, a figure responsible for massive destruction and countless casualties. Yet if she grew up peacefully, she might never walk that path, and Alone hoped for exactly that outcome, believing that by securing her situation, he had already removed the first major threat. Thinking it best to give a vague explanation, Alone cleared his throat and stated that the timing was not right, which left Yeben surprised as he tried to understand what his master meant by that. As Yeben carefully considered the situation, Alone continued by instructing him to ensure that no word of this incident spread, while also providing the children with generous support, and Yeben readily agreed. In that moment, Alone handed him a letter and told him to deliver it to Yusha, which prompted Yeben to question whether it was something important, only for Alone to explain that it was merely a get-well letter meant to calm her after the harsh ordeal of human experimentation. This surprised Yeben, as he had not expected his master to write such a letter, but he accepted the task and promised to deliver it safely. Moments later, as Yeben departed, Alone watched from the window and admitted to himself that he was unsure whether the letter would truly calm Yusha, but he felt compelled to try. Hidden within the polite words was a true message, something Alone had encountered countless times while replaying the game, a phrase known as a passage of verse that appeared during the Sin of Wrath storyline. In the next moment, recalling those events, he envisioned the Sin of Wrath consumed by rage and remembered that in the original timeline the chant had failed, leading to battle, but now, 10 years earlier, it might still work. Stretching his body, Alone reflected that he had managed to deal with one of the 5 destruction flags and began to wonder which sin to approach next. Though he admitted it sounded absurd to believe he could befriend such a monster with a single phrase, yet considering that they were a tribe devoted to an otherworldly being, he thought it might still be possible, while also acknowledging that minds driven by fanaticism were impossible to predict. In the following scene, Yusha was shown reading Alone's letter as Yeben observed her and thought about how the immense magical power he sensed from her remained overwhelming, noting as well that she seemed like a strange child devoid of emotion. Suddenly, Yusha asked if the sender of the letter was Alone, and with a menacing aura, she demanded to know why he had not summoned her, leaving Yeben too stunned to respond as he realized that such an overwhelming presence was something only those at the master level could manifest. At that critical moment, he recalled Alone's earlier words and quickly repeated that the time was not yet right, which caused Yusha to calm down as she accepted the explanation. She then hugged the letter warmly and treated it as a promise that only her master could understand, declaring that she finally understood, while Yeben remained completely confused by the situation. Yusha, known as the Blood Queen, a daughter of the grotesque blood and the future sin of this cycle, now wore a bright expression as she accepted Alone's will, while elsewhere Alone lay on his bed after a long day, satisfied that he had extended his life a little further, believing even the moonlight encouraged him as he resolved to work just as hard on the next step, before finally falling into a calm sleep. In the next scene, a pile of books collapsed and fell onto Alone's head, yet he paid no attention as frustration consumed him for failing to find any clues about the third boss. At that moment, Yeben rushed in with concern and informed his master that they had successfully rescued the second child as instructed. Hearing this, Alone immediately asked whether the child had been treated kindly during the rescue, and Yeben assured him that everything had been handled properly, explaining that they had saved the child from an illegal slave market. However, just as those words were spoken, the door was suddenly forced open and a man with a menacing presence entered the room, calling out to Alone, revealing himself to be Tonio Polanco, the second son of the family. Placing a hand on Alone's head, Tonio mocked him for handling books and questioned whether someone so incompetent was trying to learn how to read. Alone remained silent, which only angered Tonio further as he demanded a response when spoken to by his elder. Internally, Alone reflected on how Tonio constantly picked fights and wondered how he had even managed to survive this long before. Though he wanted to retaliate, he knew he could not, and instead he dropped to his knees and excused himself, stating that since Tonio intended to use the study, he would leave. Satisfied, Tonio pressed his foot onto Alone's head, pleased that he still knew his place. But in the very next moment, a knife flew past him and embedded itself into the wall ahead. A cold voice followed, mocking them as mere insects for causing such noise. Tonio was immediately enraged by the insult, But before he could react further, the eldest son, Leo Palancho, made his entrance and calmly stated that he did not wish to see blood so early in the day, ordering both of them to leave. The tension between the two brothers quickly escalated as they faced each other with hostility, arguing intensely, while in the background, Alone quietly attempted to slip away, carefully avoiding being caught in the middle of their conflict. The Palancho family, in the game, were nothing more than side characters who disappeared quickly, yet their true power was far beyond what anyone imagined, which led the two debauched brothers to engage in a fierce struggle over the headship of the house. They were figures tied to the underworld, one known as the King of Flesh and the other as the King of Drugs, both operating massive criminal empires, making them the kind of people one should never cross if they wished for a peaceful life. In that moment, as the two eldest brothers clashed violently, Alone quietly slipped away from the scene, and with a firm resolve, he decided that he would simply live as a weak and incompetent noble. Shortly after, Alone was seen lying exhausted on a sofa when Yeben spoke up, mentioning that the second child seemed unusual, and Alone responded with an indifferent look, which made Yeben question how someone like him could uncover secret human experiments in foreign lands, dismantle illegal slave markets, and rescue children, leaving him wondering about his master's true intentions. Yeben added that Alone could barely take care of himself, yet he still chose to act in such strange ways, even sending the child they had finally found off to an orphanage, calling his master truly peculiar. Hearing that, Alone thought to himself that calling the child unusual was a severe understatement, as they were speaking of a being capable of bringing about world-ending destruction. Within the Union of Nations, at its very center lay the Kingdom of Kalian, and from there came the boy rescued from the slave market, Psychedelia's second boss, Deus McCallion. After enduring endless abuse and being traded like property, Deus eventually became the sin of sloth among the 5 great sins, a being who destroyed entire kingdoms in horrifying ways, a part of the story that left many players disturbed by his cruelty. Alone reflected that despite the title of sloth, Deus was relentless in delivering vengeance many times over, which was why he had repeatedly warned Yeben to treat him with utmost care. Taking a sip of his tea, Alone stated that sending the second child to the orphanage was not the right time yet, and upon hearing that, Yeben acknowledged it as expected and wondered if the letter Alone had sent to Yusha was related to the second child. Hearing that, Alone agreed with Yeben and added that he had included some light small talk in the letter, also asking Yusha to take good care of the child since he was rather frail. In the next scene, Deus could be seen standing alone, covered in bruises, when the sound of approaching footsteps broke the silence, followed by a voice pointing out that he was broken and that the marks on his body were the work of that thing, the black goat. Turning toward the speaker, Deus found Yusha standing before him, and with a menacing expression, she declared that the great moon had chosen him, offering her congratulations as she urged him to embrace the power within and draw it out. Extending her hand with a chilling smile, she told him that by serving with unwavering loyalty, he would be granted the strength to take his revenge, and in that moment, a powerful purple aura burst forth brilliantly. Moments later, holding the letter she had received from Alone, Yusha remarked that she would now send her first reply with a simple greeting. The following morning, Yeben suddenly burst into the room where Alone sat surrounded by piles of books, looking exhausted as he continued searching for clues about the third boss, and with urgency, Yeben announced that there was terrible news. Mentioning Alone's second brother, he revealed that Tonio Palancho had died, which left Alone visibly surprised by how sudden it was. In the next scene, during Tonio's funeral, while others mourn his death, their father behaved in complete contrast, casually flirting with women and showing no concern at all, which made Alone realize that although he already knew his father was unhinged, witnessing such behavior during his own son's funeral made the situation feel like something straight out of a dark fantasy nightmare. Alone shifted his focus back to the fact that Tonio had died far earlier than expected under the excuse of an accidental fall, which did not match what he remembered from the game at all. In the original story, he was certain that their eldest brother Leo had been the one to kill Tonio, and that Leo had wept bitterly after doing so through great hardship. Yet now, as Alone observed him, Leo was instead grinning as if he had won a lottery. Seeing this, Alone concluded that the culprit had to be Leo or someone from his faction, and there was little doubt about it. But regardless, his priority remained the same, which was to deal with the 5 great sins. 1 year later, with the succession issue resolved and Leo taking control of the drug trade, the Palancho family became more stable than ever. During that time, Alone had begun exchanging letters with Yusha, and as he read about the daily lives of the orphans and what they were doing, he found himself thinking that they simply seemed like good children. As he continued reading, he noticed that the donation list had grown once again, which made him question how such a small orphanage kept receiving increasing support, while Yeben reassured him that it was good news. Changing the topic, Yeben then brought up the matter Alone had been searching for and informed him that the Information Guild had finally discovered a clue. Hearing this, Alone reacted positively, while internally thinking that it must refer to an ancient record connected to the third boss, feeling relieved that he had finally found a lead. As the two enjoyed a rare moment of calm during the peaceful evening, the scene shifted elsewhere, where bloodshed painted the background at a drug distribution site known as Margot, and two individuals were seen walking through the area, with a bald man remarking on how generous the eldest Palancho was due to the high pay, while his blonde companion agreed and added that their organization had already expanded to hundreds. However, just as the two were about to continue their conversation, they noticed that most of their men were lying dead on the ground. And not only that, the remaining survivors were seen taking their own lives, as if being controlled by an unseen force. In that moment, even the bald man began trying to kill himself despite clearly resisting, but it proved useless as neither of them were spared, and using their own weapons, they ended their lives on the spot. As the chaos unfolded, a mysterious figure appeared, followed by another who casually remarked that she had enjoyed the puppet show and that the list of sponsorships to report had grown, revealing the two to be Yusha and Deus. Once the scene settled, Deus questioned whether these actions truly held any meaning, and Yusha responded by asking if he felt pity, which he denied, stating that those men were responsible for turning people into drugs, yet he still doubted whether this would help them achieve their revenge. Yusha assured him that it would, explaining that these actions were laying the foundation for their master's return, and that when that time came, his throne could not be tainted, which led Deus to accept her reasoning. With that, both of them vanished from the scene, and soon appeared high in the air, where Yusha declared that everything was unfolding according to his will, as a bright purple light shone, and she proclaimed that they, as the blue moon, would become his blade before disappearing once more. In the next scene, 2 years had passed since Alone began exchanging letters with Yusha, and Yeben was seen struggling to locate his master, eventually collapsing from exhaustion before finally finding him in the backyard, where Alone appeared completely unbothered. Still catching his breath, Yeben informed him that the fifth child had been safely sent to the orphanage, which pleased Alone as he thought to himself that, by this point, the remaining sins had also been secured. In that moment, Alone casually offered Yeben some cake, which Yeben accepted with clear relief. In that moment, Alone thought to himself that finding the third one, the sin of greed, had been a struggle, but it was not impossible with his knowledge from the game, and after pushing Yeben to his limits, everything had worked out in the end. As Yeben happily munched on the treats Alone had given him, Alone spoke up and acknowledged his hard work, telling him that he could finally rest for a while, which led Yeben to wonder if the orphanage mission was now complete, and Alone confirmed that it was done, bringing Yeben a sense of relief. Lying on the floor, Yeben then asked his master if he was happy now, and although Alone said that he was, his expression did not reflect it at all, prompting Yeben to point it out, only for Alone to insist that he was smiling despite showing no visible change, which Yeben eventually accepted. Moments later, Alone stretched his body and lay on the ground, thinking that things had gone even better than expected and that everything had been progressing smoothly. In Psychedelia, the bosses eventually became the 5 great sins after experiencing tragic pasts, and even though this timeline was set before their awakening, the chances of perfectly saving them from those fates had been slim, yet Alone felt it would have been far more difficult to deal with them after they had already been broken. He then asked Yeben about the current state of the orphanage, and Yeben, pulling out a letter, explained that everything was proceeding as usual and that the children, who had once been like broken dolls, were gradually becoming brighter. Hearing this, Alone noted that they might soon need to hire caretakers, and as he opened the letter, he thought to himself that he had not expected Yusha to manage things so well, wondering if it was due to her character setting being tied to the orphanage. Looking through the contents, Alone remarked that Yusha seemed like a good child as well, which led Yeben to ask if anything unusual was written, but the letter turned out to be ordinary, simply stating that everyone was doing well and that there was no need for concern. Seeing this, Alone felt relieved and satisfied, thinking that it was comforting to see the children growing up properly, and that all 5 great sins were developing normally, making him believe that perhaps their environment did not matter as much as he once thought. In that moment, Yeben asked Alone when he planned to finally meet them, recalling that Alone had once said the time would come, and upon hearing that, Alone admitted to himself that he had no real intention of meeting them in person, reasoning that while getting closer might be beneficial, the process that turned them into sins had been so horrific that even in the game's flashbacks, their personalities as children had already been unsettling. He reassured himself that saving them before their awakening should make things better, yet he still found the idea frightening, so he answered that perhaps meeting them after 5 years would be acceptable. Changing the topic, Alone stated that in this harsh, dark fantasy world, all he needed now was some self-defense ability, and with that he began training his magic, which required talent that he fortunately possessed. As he trained, Yeben asked whether he had heard of a group called the Blue Moon, and Alone replied that he had not, prompting Yeben to explain that they had recently gained notoriety for hunting down criminal organizations. While continuing his training, Alone commented that it sounded like they were doing good work, though internally he noted that such a group had never appeared in the game and assumed they would likely disappear soon. However, Yeben added that the group had even killed nobles, which was why he thought Alone might be aware of them. And upon hearing this, Alone immediately called out to Yeben and instructed him to start sleeping in the room next to his. Later that night, inside the orphanage, Yusha gathered the children and asked for the Blue Moon's weekly activity report, calling on one of them who was in charge of the North District, and the child, rubbing her eyes, calmly reported that everything had been handled, including the slave trader's head, revealing herself to be Solon, the future sin of pride. In that moment, Solon leapt high into the air and proudly declared that the enemies had never discovered her identity, thanking Renee for the outfit she had made, as she explained that she had given her opponents a chance to live if they could guess her eye color, but none succeeded due to her disguise. In that moment, another child reported that all the bodies had been buried cleanly, revealing herself to be Renee, the future sin of greed. Shortly after, another boy spoke up and stated that the South had also been taken care of, boasting that he had turned everything in the human experimentation lab and the Avalon forces into nothing but mincemeat, leaving nothing behind, and that boy was Raiden, the sin of obsession. Hearing their reports, Yusha praised them and declared that everything was proceeding according to the will of the Great Moon, adding that they, as the secret organization known as the Blue Moon, existed solely to serve their master. However, one of the children then mentioned that there was a problem, and upon hearing this, Yusha's expression darkened into something menacing as she insisted that everything should be perfect under his guidance and demanded to know who dared to disrupt it. At that moment, Dea spoke up and revealed that the head of Avalon was the eldest son of the same family their master belonged to, and that while dealing with the South, he had come across a concerning note, believing that the head of Avalon was targeting the Great Moon. Hearing this, Yusha grew visibly enraged, releasing an overwhelming aura that left the others tense and uneasy. And as she read the contents of the letter, she crushed it in her hand and confirmed that it was true. In the next scene, 2 years later, Count Palancho had passed away, with the official cause listed as a heart attack, though Alone noted that his father had been abusing drugs until his final moments, making it unsurprising. As Alone stood before his father's body, he overheard discussions about the Blue Moon once again, with Leo's subordinates reporting that the group had launched a surprise raid the previous night, prompting Leo to ask whether everyone had been killed. Observing this, Alone realized that Leo seemed far more concerned about the Blue Moon than the actual reason they had all gathered there. And so, the Count's funeral came to an end in cold, impassive silence, with not a single tear shed, as everyone simply returned to their lives as if nothing had happened. Moments later, Yeben asked his young master what their next course of action would be, adding that in a year's time Leo would officially become the new Count. But as he spoke, he noticed several items scattered across the floor and questioned what they were, only for Alone to tell him to start packing as well, handing over his luggage and stating that they needed to leave this place, which left Yeben confused as he asked why they were planning to depart from the estate. As Yeben began packing his belongings, Alone clarified that they were not leaving for good and that they would only be heading south for the time being, which prompted Yeben to ask if they were going to Rodmill. Alone internally confirmed that this had always been his plan, as Rodmill was a small town located south of the Palancho estate and the ideal place for what he intended to do. Soon after, the two boarded a carriage and departed, and as the carriage moved away, Leo could be seen from afar, quietly watching Alone leave the estate. Some time later, Alone was shown cooking breakfast for himself, and as he and Yeben briefly enjoyed a calm and peaceful routine, that normalcy lasted only 3 days before Alone found himself back at the manor once again, this time for Leo's funeral, leaving him visibly troubled by the situation he was now facing. He questioned why he had already returned to this suffocating mansion so soon, realizing that this death too was different from what he remembered in the game. And as he looked at his brother's body, he noticed the fatal stab wounds directly to the heart, which made him question who could have been responsible for such a sudden and unexpected death. At that moment, Alone turned toward one of the knights present, and as he was about to ask about the cause of death, the knight reacted with visible fear of being addressed, immediately apologizing for making eye contact, which left Alone confused about what was wrong with everyone. As he was still processing that strange reaction, Yeben arrived and called out to his young master, prompting Alone to ask if he had found anything, and Yeben replied that he had indeed found something, though he seemed unsure about how to say it. Leaning closer, Yebin whispered into Alone's ear and asked whether he was the mastermind behind the complete destruction of Avalon overnight, which caused Alone to freeze in confusion upon hearing such a claim. In that moment, Alone looked around and noticed that everyone present was avoiding his gaze, clearly terrified of even making eye contact with him. The scene then shifted back to the day Alone had set off for Rod Mill, where inside the carriage, Yebin questioned why they were heading to a small and quiet town instead of a bustling city. Alone explained that a city was not an option for him, and that Rod Mill was his true destination, the place where all his plans would come together. He stated that his mission was simple, which was to save the 5 great sins from their tragic fates in order to prevent the world from collapsing. And since Rod Mill was not part of the original story and even had a villa, it was the ideal place for him to settle down. He added that a villa, being a separate estate, would allow him to live peacefully as a carefree noble without interference, where he could relax and do nothing. Alone then emphasized that everything he did had a purpose, but after hearing similar explanations repeatedly, Yebin pointed out that his master always used the same lines whenever he wanted to avoid answering directly, making it clear that he could no longer be fooled by those responses. Alone was taken aback by how easily Yebin saw through his small lies, and as their banter continued, the scene shifted to Leo, who had been watching Alone's carriage leave while contemplating whether he should kill him or not. From Leo's perspective, it did not truly matter whether Alone lived or died, as he had already planned to poison him. But now that Alone had chosen to head toward the border, he felt there was no longer any real reason to go through with it, yet for some reason he still felt an unexplained urge to eliminate him. Acting on that impulse, Leo ordered one of his subordinates, Alman, to follow the carriage, but Alman responded by asking if that meant he was supposed to kill the young master, which caught Leo off guard since Alman had never questioned his orders before and had always obeyed without hesitation, making this sudden response feel unusual. Leo reminded him that his role was simply to obey, but before he could finish speaking, Alman suddenly lunged forward and drove a blade straight through Leo's heart. Shocked and unable to comprehend what had just happened, Leo demanded to know why Alman would betray him, but Alman calmly responded that he simply enjoyed playing war. It was then revealed that Alman was actually a member of the Blue Moon organization and that his real name was Haydn, and he went on to explain that they followed a creed taught by the Blue Moon, believing themselves to be the sword of the Great Moon and acting in accordance with its will. He further stated that if anyone dared to threaten the Great Moon, they were permitted to act on their own judgment and eliminate that threat, and Haydn revealed that he had been waiting for Leo to give the order to kill their lord, expressing disbelief that it had taken 2 full years for that moment to arrive. Leo attempted to argue that his remaining subordinates would not allow Haydn to escape, but Haydn dismissed this, claiming that with Leo's death, the entire organization would soon be erased from the continent. As he looked down at Leo's lifeless body, Haydn quietly remarked on how unfortunate the situation had turned out. If Leo had not attempted to kill their great master, he might have lived for a few more months or even years, but in the present, Alone was completely unaware of that as he peacefully enjoyed his dream life in the small town of Rod Mill. He woke up whenever he pleased and shared delicious meals with Yebin, living exactly like a carefree noble. But fate had other plans as his brief happiness was shattered the moment he received a letter. The contents demanded that he return and take his place as the next head of the family. And just like that, his peaceful life came to an abrupt end only 4 days after it had begun, forcing him back to the Palancho estate. However, the moment he returned, he immediately felt that something was off, as the maids and servants all behaved strangely around him, making him question what was causing such odd reactions. Then, in a teasing tone, Yebin asked him when he had become the Shadow Leader, which left Alone completely confused, until it slowly dawned on him that everything stemmed from the suspicious circumstances surrounding his brother's death, placing him in this uncomfortable position. Overwhelmed, he began lamenting dramatically, asking why he had somehow ended up as the villain in this situation, while Yebin calmly pointed out that since Alone stood to gain the most from his brother's death, it was only natural for others to suspect him. The timing only made things worse, as Leo had died right after Alone left the estate, giving him the perfect alibi while also placing him in line to inherit everything, which made Alone realize that his attempt to avoid trouble had completely backfired. Frustration built within him, but Yebin tried to reassure him by explaining that with the drug organization Avalon gone and his brother dead, there was no longer anything for him to worry about. He even joked that this effectively made Alone the new Shadow Leader of the county, someone who had supposedly orchestrated the assassination of a swordmaster, and despite Leo's questionable character, he was still widely recognized as a swordmaster. Hearing this, Alone began to think about where to even start, as he could not imagine any group capable of eliminating such a powerful figure in the underworld so quickly. And recalling what Yeben had mentioned before, he asked about the group known for hunting organizations, which led Yeben to bring up the Blue Moon, causing Alone to wonder if that group was responsible for both his brother's death and the fall of Avalon. However, Yeben quickly cleared up the misunderstanding, explaining that according to the Information Guild, the Blue Moon was not responsible, as unlike this incident, they were known for leaving behind a distinct mark of the moon rather than corpses. Instead, it was rumored that all members of Avalon had been killed in the same manner, each meeting their end with a sword driven straight through the heart. Yeben could not resist teasing Alone, joking that the road to hell had now been opened, but setting that aside, Alone began reflecting on his knowledge from the game, realizing that there had never been any organization called the Blue Moon in the original story, which meant they should not have been involved in this situation at all. This only deepened his confusion, as he struggled to figure out who could possibly be behind such a precise and overwhelming massacre. As he tried to piece everything together, the scene shifted to the orphanage, where Yusha was holding a meeting with the other future sins, calmly asking if everything had gone smoothly. Renee, the sin of greed, confirmed that she had left no traces behind, while Solon, the sin of pride, added that there were no survivors on her side, only corpses. Deus then spoke with confidence, claiming that he had eliminated all 486 soldiers of Avalon, describing his magic as something beautiful yet deadly, like a butterfly caught in a web. Raiden, the sin of obsession, also reported that he had cut down every last enemy, ensuring none were left alive. Hearing their reports, Yusha praised their efforts, though her presence remained unsettling. In this way, Avalon, the most notorious drug organization responsible for bringing ruin to the Asteria Kingdom, was completely wiped out in just 5 days. However, the moment did not remain calm for long, as Raiden suddenly pointed out that the cleanup might not have been perfect, and when Yusha asked what he meant, he explained that he had discovered documents connected to nobles associated with Avalon, particularly something known as Altea Doctum, which appear to have deep ties. Upon hearing this, Yusha's magic began to surge ominously, and without hesitation, she declared that they already knew what needed to be done next, making it clear that their next target would be to eliminate them all. Raiden assured everyone that he would handle the matter quietly. And with that settled, Yusha shifted the discussion by asking whether the Information Guild was clean and if it had any ties to Avalon. Renee confirmed that the guild was not directly involved, explaining that its situation was being handled separately from the issue concerning the Blue Moon. Deus then added his own perspective, claiming that all such guilds operated in similar ways, describing them as tools shaped like a hellish sword crafted by a swordmaster. Hearing this, Renee asked whether she should monitor Alone's movements, and Yusha agreed, stressing that none of their actions or this entire situation must ever reach that person's awareness, repeating that she had already made this clear multiple times. When she referred to that person, she was speaking of Alone, and Deus pointed out that since his family had targeted them first, the decision to eliminate them had not been directly ordered by him. This caused Yusha to grow visibly uneasy, as she firmly believed that all their actions should originate from Alone's will, insisting that they were merely swords and that a sword should never act on its own. She then declared that from that moment onward, every member of the Blue Moon must act only under direct orders, and that this rule must be followed without exception, which left the others slightly unsettled as she added that they must never disappoint that person under any circumstances. Internally, Deus struggled to understand her reaction, finding it excessive that someone as powerful as Yusha would feel such anxiety simply at the thought of being discovered, yet he still chose to agree with her. With that, they concluded their meeting by chanting that everything was for the Great Moon. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Alone found himself buried under endless paperwork as the new count of the Polanco family, reflecting that after his brother's funeral, he had spent an entire month dealing with overwhelming responsibilities. Exhausted, he began to complain, even tearing up slightly as he lamented that all he wanted was to live lazily and do nothing, stubbornly insisting that such a carefree existence was what it truly meant to be a noble. Even so, Alone could not shake the thought that although he had made quite a few enemies, his brother Leo's death was originally meant to occur 6 years later, but due to the strange and unnatural circumstances surrounding his brother's deaths, everything had shifted, leaving him burdened with all the family responsibilities as the sole heir. Just then, several ministers from the county entered the room, bringing even more piles of paperwork for him to handle, causing Alone to close his eyes in frustration as he wondered why everyone in the county suddenly seemed so diligent, especially when back during his father's time, they would slack off and treat work as casually as a rainy day off. He waved his hand, signaling them to place the documents on his desk, but from the minister's perspective, Alone appeared to be radiating a terrifying aura, which made them anxious as they worried that they might have somehow offended him, with some even resolving to work harder to avoid punishment. In their eyes, Alone was a hidden mastermind who would not hesitate to eliminate anyone who displeased him. But in reality, having once been an overworked laborer himself, he was struggling to cope with the overwhelming pressure. Alone even began to wonder if there was a way to push all the work onto the ministers instead, hoping to escape the burden. Later that night, Yebin was shocked to discover that Alone had reached the second tier in magic after just 2 years of self-study, proving that he was highly talented and not afraid to show it, as he casually cast spells throughout the house. Normally, reaching the second tier required 4 to 5 years of proper instruction along with natural talent, and while Alone admitted that his magical ability was quite decent, deep down he knew that he had been training intensely for the sake of self-defense, as something about his situation felt off. To use magic effectively for protection required precise control over mana, something he was beginning to grasp, yet he still questioned the usefulness of his abilities if they remained incomplete. He insisted that he had experimented with every type of magic available in this world, and while it had been exciting at first, he had believed that mastering magic would mean he would have nothing left to fear. But now it felt less like he was learning magic out of curiosity and more like he was desperately scrambling to save his own life. And it was at that moment that a harsh reality struck him. His mana capacity was dangerously small, and without sufficient mana, using magic was impossible, which in turn meant danger and even death. As Alone sank deeper into his thoughts, it became clear that innate mana capacity was like an athlete's natural weight class, something one was born with and could not easily change, and while others possessed overwhelming talent, Alone was stuck with a pitifully small reserve that no amount of training could truly fix. Even so, he refused to give up completely, clinging to the faint hope that there might still be a way to overcome this limitation. Just then, Yebin interrupted his thoughts, informing him that his invitation to the upcoming ball had finally arrived, which left Alone momentarily confused. A few days later, the scene shifted to the grand ball, where Alone made his entrance dressed in elegant and eye-catching attire, looking every bit like a noble despite already feeling exhausted the moment he arrived due to his introverted nature. The event itself was a typical aristocratic gathering held in the southern region of the Asteria Kingdom, essentially a social meeting place for nobles, and since Alone was soon to be officially appointed as a count, his presence was mandatory. Realizing the importance of the occasion, he switched to a more serious mindset, seeing it as the perfect opportunity to build connections with other nobles, something essential for achieving his ultimate goal of living a peaceful life. However, he quickly discovered that things were not going as planned, as the other nobles seemed to avoid him entirely, with some even running away in fear the moment he approached or tried to greet them. Even when he attempted something as simple as waving, they reacted by fleeing, which left him confused, while Yebin tried to encourage him not to feel discouraged. Alone insisted that he was not bothered at all, even though his expression suggested otherwise, claiming that he had expected such reactions and that he would simply try harder before deciding to approach others on his own. Despite this, he remained unaware of the true reason behind their behavior, believing that the nobles were merely looking down on him as a low-ranking noble without strong backing, a conclusion that, while not entirely incorrect, failed to capture the full truth of the situation. The current Palancho household was indeed filled with troublemakers like his 2 older brothers, and as Alone picked up a wine glass, he reassured himself that he had not come to the ball without a plan and was determined to finally put the social skills he had been secretly practicing to use. He began speaking aloud about the wine's unique aroma in an attempt to start a conversation, but due to the strange condition that made it difficult for him to show emotions, his expression appeared cold and unsettling, and when he tried to smile, it only made him look even more intimidating. Trying to act naturally, he mentioned to a lady that he would like to have some bottles at home, all while believing that his smile was perfectly fine. Yet from her perspective, he resembled something terrifying, causing her to panic and rush away, while saying she would inform her father to prepare them immediately. To the surrounding nobles, the situation looked completely different, as it appeared that Alone had just threatened and coerced her into giving him a rare and valuable regional wine, turning the entire interaction into a misunderstanding. Yebin attempted to comfort him afterward, while Alone convinced himself that the lady had simply been shy, but as time passed, he was later seen sulking in a corner while Yebin happily enjoyed the food and teased him about how his collection of gifts had grown. It became clear that the wine incident was not an isolated case, as every attempt Alone made to speak with others resulted in them assuming he was threatening them, leading them to hand over various expensive items, such as rare goods and specialty drinks, just to avoid conflict. This only reinforced the growing rumors surrounding him, making Alone realize that the Palancho name had become far more infamous than he had ever anticipated, especially with whispers spreading that he had killed his own brothers, turning him into a figure people feared. Feeling increasingly frustrated, Alone told Yebin that he needed some fresh air and stepped outside, where his attention was briefly drawn to a striking red-haired figure. And as he stood there reflecting on how everything had gone so wrong, a gentle voice suddenly called out to him from behind, asking if he had a moment. Confused, he turned around, but initially saw no one, only to then look down and notice a small, charming girl who introduced herself as Loria, the third daughter of Duke Altea. Hearing the name Altea, Alone immediately recognized it from the game and recalled that the Altea family was one of the three major shadow players in Psychedelia, known as the Northern Troublemakers, which made the situation far more complicated than he had hoped, as he had initially wished that someone normal had simply approached him. At the same time, he found it strange that he could not remember Loria at all, which led him to question whether she had even appeared in the game. Loria, however, wasted no time and directly asked him to lend her his strength for protection, explaining that she was about to face an assassination attempt and was in serious danger, making it clear that she needed his help. As Alone looked at her, his hesitation was evident, especially after learning that she had been living under the protection of her father's mistress, and with her father's health declining, she feared that her older sisters might try to eliminate her, a situation that reminded Alone of his own past with his brothers. As he continued to observe her, it slowly dawned on him that the reason he could not recall her from the game was likely because she had already died before ever making an appearance in the story. With a pleading expression, Loria continued to ask for his help, insisting that someone with his abilities could make a difference, but despite this, Alone firmly refused. She quickly added that she was not making the request without offering anything in return, promising to give him half of the Altea family's fortune if he saved her. Yet even with that offer, Alone chose to walk away, though he could not completely suppress the sympathy he felt for her. Deep down, he understood that he could barely manage his own magic, and that it would be wrong to give her false hope, as he was not the powerful figure everyone believed him to be. As he returned to the party hall, he found himself unable to forget the sight of Loria's saddened expression, which left him feeling guilty, and before fully stepping inside, he silently wished her luck. Meanwhile, from a distance, Deus and Renee had been observing everything and began discussing what their next move should be after seeing a member of the Altea family approach their master, with Deus considering whether he should report this to the Red Moon, their code name for Yusha, while Renee reassured him that there was no immediate concern, as their information indicated that Loria was the only member of the Altea family not connected to Avalon. This meant that Loria was essentially safe for the moment, as Raiden, the sin of obsession, had already gone to deal with the rest of her family. And under the orders of the Red Moon, the remaining members of the Altea household were set to be completely wiped out. Renee further added that their primary mission right now was to ensure that their master never discovered anything related to the Avalon incident, as keeping him unaware was of utmost importance. Meanwhile, the completely oblivious Alone found himself wondering why everyone continued to avoid him, questioning if there was some kind of invisible barrier surrounding him that kept others at a distance. Just then, the red-haired woman he had noticed earlier approached him, and for a brief moment, it genuinely lifted his spirits, as he felt relieved that someone had finally acknowledged him, even if his expression failed to show it. Alone thought that perhaps this time he might actually succeed in socializing, but as he turned to face her, he quickly realized that she was far from an ordinary noble. Recognizing her face from the game, it struck him that no normal person would approach him first unless they were connected to something dangerous, and he greeted her by name, addressing her as Lady Kalia, which immediately caught her off guard as she wondered how he knew who she was. Alone explained that she was quite well known, recalling that within the Asteria Kingdom there were three major shadow player families, the Altea in the north, the Palancho in the east, and the Genonia in the west, and that she was the eldest daughter of Count Genonia. Kalia questioned whether she was truly that famous, while Alone internally reflected that although the Palancho family operated like a gang, the Genonia family functioned more like a calculated criminal syndicate, a thought that made him uneasy. He reminded himself that what he truly needed were stable connections to maintain his peaceful, noble life. And for that reason, he believed it was best to avoid getting involved with someone like her, who clearly seemed dangerous. With that in mind, he gave a polite bow and complimented her beauty, almost as if he were trying to end the conversation before it began, but Kalia stopped him and stated that she had something important she wanted to discuss with him. He responded that he would like to talk, but pointed out that there were far too many eyes watching them at the moment, while inwardly wishing that she would simply leave him alone and not drag him into anything troublesome. Kalia, however, only smiled and remarked that he was exactly as the rumors described, adding that she looked forward to meeting him again before walking away, leaving Alone completely confused as he tried to make sense of her words. For a moment, He wondered if her statement carried some hidden meaning or coded message, but ultimately chose to dismiss it as overthinking. Meanwhile, from a distance, Renee and Deus observed the interaction and felt satisfied that their efforts to keep Alone unaware of the truth were proceeding smoothly, though Deus soon pointed out an issue as they noticed someone lurking nearby who had been secretly following him for quite some time. Realizing the potential threat, the two quickly moved to eliminate it before it could escalate further. The next day, Alone and Yeben found themselves deep within a forest, where Yeben questioned whether this was truly the canyon they had been searching for, noting how strange it was that despite it being midday with sunlight overhead, the canyon itself remained shrouded in darkness. Alone, however, paid little attention to such details, as he was overwhelmed with excitement at finally reaching his true objective. As they stepped deeper inside, he jokingly remarked that if this place turned out to be another empty location like the previous ones, he might genuinely break down, but upon noticing the strange symbols carved into the walls, he immediately realized that this was the real place. He recalled that in the game, discovering this location had been relatively simple, and admitted that the only reason he had traveled all the way south under the pretense of attending the ball was to locate this very labyrinth. Known as the Labyrinth of Whispers, it was a place where solving the riddles hidden within its 8 chambers would grant a powerful artifact as a reward, which was precisely what Alone had been seeking all along. Alone confidently stated that he had memorized every route and puzzle within this labyrinth, and before long, he arrived in front of a massive door, where he paused for a moment, admitting to himself that seeing the entrance in person was far more breathtaking than he had ever imagined, feeling much more vivid and real compared to how it appeared in the game, where he had cleared it countless times. Meanwhile, Yeben questioned how Alone even knew about such a place, prompting Alone to casually reply that he had been there many times before, which only left Yeben confused as he tried to understand what his master meant, forcing Alone to quickly correct himself and brush it off as a joke before suggesting they move forward. As they entered, they were immediately met with dangerous creatures and massive hands capable of crushing them effortlessly, causing Yeben to wonder if these were tied to the riddles and whether a wrong answer would result in instant death. Yet Alone remained completely unfazed as he began solving the puzzle without hesitation, leaving Yeben astonished at how calm he was in such a perilous situation. Reflecting on their time together, Yeben realized that even after 4 years, he still could not fully understand Alone, as his actions often seemed strange, from rescuing orphans and repaying random debts to freeing slaves and delivering messages that appeared meaningless, making him seem like an odd individual in Yeben's eyes. However, watching Alone solve each riddle effortlessly only deepened the mystery, as it made no sense for someone who rarely left the estate to possess such detailed knowledge about this place. Yet despite all this, Yeben acknowledged that he continued to follow him for one simple reason, as everything Alone did somehow led to favorable outcomes. Eventually, they made it deeper inside, but Alone could not completely shake off the unsettling memories of the labyrinth from the game, feeling slightly uneasy, until they entered a lavish chamber overflowing with gold and treasures, where his attention was immediately drawn to a statue of a hand adorned with multiple rings. Without hesitation, he declared that their objective was the Black Ring and urged that they take it and leave as quickly as possible, while Yeben, who had already begun stuffing his pockets with gold, questioned why Alone was so focused on what appeared to be the least valuable ring, prompting Alone to explain that taking anything else would only invite trouble in the future. Deep down, Alone realized that he had finally obtained the ring known as the Oath of Restraint, and as they began making their way back, he felt a sense of satisfaction, thinking that acquiring it had been far easier than expected thanks to his knowledge from the game. However, Yeben suddenly sensed something was wrong and pointed out that the piles of rocks they had passed earlier were actually golems that were now beginning to stir, immediately putting him on edge as he prepared for battle. To Yeben, these creatures were completely unknown, making the situation extremely dangerous, and he resolved that if necessary, he would prioritize getting his master out safely even at the cost of his own life. But before he could act, Alone stepped forward and told him to stand down, insisting that he would handle the golems himself. As the massive figures began to move and close in, Yeben urged him to focus on escaping instead, warning that his current level of magic would not be enough to deal with them. Yet Alone remained calm and composed as he activated the power of the Black Ring by invoking the Oath of Restraint. In that instant, everything around him seemed to slow down, and he found himself pulled into a strange dimension where a mysterious voice introduced itself as a fragment inheriting the will of Nyakula, instructing him to declare 2 restrictions he wished to impose upon himself. Although in the game this moment had appeared as a simple choice prompt, experiencing it in reality was far more overwhelming, as he now faced a massive, incomprehensible presence within a dark and endless expanse. The artifact, true to its name, allowed the user to impose limitations in exchange for power, but the sheer intensity of the voice caused Alone to tremble slightly as it demanded his first condition. Gathering himself, he formed a hand sign and declared that he would always perform the hand signs of Bavaloya when casting magic. And when asked what he sought in return, he expressed his desire to slightly bend the laws of the world. The voice acknowledged his request and granted him that power before asking for his second restriction, to which Alone firmly stated that he would strictly chant the words of Bavaloya whenever he used magic. When the voice asked what he desired in return for his second restriction, Alone boldly declared that he wanted even greater power to defy the laws of the world, which caused a mysterious entity to fall silent for a moment, clearly taken aback by his ambition. This brief pause made Alone uneasy, as he began to worry that he might have made a mistake, especially since he had carefully replicated the exact combination from the game, even mimicking the skill setup to ensure accuracy. By choosing both the hand sign restriction and the chanting restriction, he believed he could achieve the highest possible magical output, something he had learned through countless playthroughs where he had memorized every possible combination. After what felt like a long moment, the entity finally spoke again, confirming that his restraints had been accepted and expressing its gratitude to the human who had preserved the gestures and secrets of a forgotten god. Although Alone did not fully understand what that meant, he soon noticed the ring being absorbed into his body, signaling that the conditions had been successfully applied, and as the entity concluded by stating that it would continue to watch over him as the inheritor of its will, the strange dimension began to fade. In the next instant, time resumed, and the golems launched their attack, prompting Yeben to rush forward in alarm, but Alone remained completely composed as he began casting his magic. He could not help but let out a small laugh, recalling how in the game such spells appeared grand and overwhelming. Yet in reality, due to his limited mana, it seemed much smaller in scale, reminding him of his inherent limitations. Even so, this was the perfect moment to test his newly imposed restraints, and as he began chanting, starting with the word refraction, his magic started to take form, followed by repulsion, which caused it to expand and grow into a brilliant blue sphere of crackling energy. With practiced hand signs, he added another chant for direction, and finally released the spell, unleashing a surge of lightning so powerful that it completely obliterated the advancing golems, reducing them to dust and leaving Yeben utterly stunned by the overwhelming display of power. In the aftermath, Yeben could hardly believe what he had just witnessed, struggling to comprehend the sheer scale of what had happened as he asked Alone if he had been hiding such power all this time, only for Alone to deny it with a shake of his head. Yeben, still in disbelief, explained that in his 15 years as a mercenary, he had never seen anything even remotely close to that level of magic, questioning whether Alone was truly certain that what he had just used was only second-tier magic, to which Alone confirmed, even though internally he was just as confused about the outcome. He admitted to himself that this was nothing like how it functioned in the game, where in Psychedelia's turn-based system, magic could be strengthened over multiple turns through the use of hand signs and incantations, and this time he had essentially stacked enhancements by using 4 incantations along with hand signs, amounting to the equivalent of 5 turns of amplification. In simple terms, he had recreated a large-scale lightning spell using optimized settings from the game. But because of the Oath of Restraint, he was now forced to apply both hand signs and chants for every spell, which unintentionally caused his magic to be amplified repeatedly. Even with that understanding, Alone still felt that the result far exceeded what second-tier magic should be capable of, leaving him caught off guard by the overwhelming output. Meanwhile, Yeben was simply relieved that they had survived the encounter, and as he sat down to catch his breath, he remarked that watching the battle had been more exhausting than actually fighting, before asking who could have possibly created such a dreadful canyon. After thinking for a moment, Alone recalled that the Labyrinth of Whispers had a different name in the game, as its map and strategies were shared on the community forums under the name Maze of Faleon, leading him to conclude that someone named Faleon must have been responsible for it, though Yeben was far too tired to process the explanation. Without wasting time, Alone pulled Yeben along, insisting that they needed to return home immediately because he had something important in mind, which only made Yeben question why his usually lazy master was suddenly so driven, prompting Alone to explain that whenever he used hand signs that matched the attribute of the spell he was casting, the power increased significantly. He realized that if the correct incantation was chosen, the properties of the magic would be enhanced, exactly as the game mechanics were designed, but unlike in the game where only the numerical values increased while the visuals remained unchanged, in this world the spell itself transformed with each incantation, evolving in form and intensity. This led Alone to wonder whether this phenomenon applied only to him, especially since he possessed unusually precise control over his mana, and he decided that he would need to properly test this theory once his mana had fully recovered, though for now he was simply relieved that everything had ended without disaster. As they prepared to leave on horseback, Renee could be seen observing from a distance, having quietly followed alone the entire time, and once he departed, she made her way into the canyon to investigate further. Upon arriving, she noticed the runes carved into the walls and quickly realized that she could understand them, identifying them as glyphs from the ancient Alanef Empire that recorded stories from the era of the Forgotten Outer Gods. As her gaze shifted, she noticed another inscription hidden in a corner, which she interpreted as a message left behind, and as she examined the glyphs more closely, a smile slowly formed on her face. Drawing upon the vast knowledge she had inherited from the ancient library since birth, Renee recalled the tale of the brilliant Emperor Falaon the Great, the one who had stood victorious against the dark creatures known for devouring the hearts of the people, ultimately halting their invasion. Remembering that Alone had casually mentioned Falaon earlier, she once again misunderstood the situation, convincing herself that she had been right about him all along, as someone who could command the loyalty of a figure like Yusha was clearly no ordinary person. In her mind, having the so-called Bloody Queen as a subordinate was something that belonged only in legends. Yet here it was reality, further strengthening her belief that Alone must be someone extraordinary. She even began to think that he was somehow connected to Falaon himself, misinterpreting the meaning behind both his words and the ancient glyphs. And when she considered the strange phrases Alone had used while casting magic, phrases that did not exist anywhere within her vast inherited knowledge, it only reinforced her conviction that he was truly remarkable. With a faint blush, Renee admitted to herself that Yusha had been right all along, feeling slightly embarrassed that she had followed orders without fully understanding the truth, now convinced more than ever that their master was far greater than she had initially imagined. At that moment, Renee noticed Deus arriving and immediately asked whether he had gathered any information from the person who had been tailing their master. But Deus casually responded that the man was already dead and that he had not even been the one to kill him, explaining that it was as if the man's head had simply twisted unnaturally in midair. Hearing this, Renee insisted that the matter needed to be reported to Yusha for proper judgment, and without wasting time, the two left the canyon to deliver the news. Meanwhile, in Genonia County, Kalia could be seen calmly sipping her tea as she reflected on her encounter with Alone, noting that he was exactly as the rumors described, with his cold, emotionless expression and those unsettling eyes that seemed like a bottomless abyss. What troubled her the most, however, was the fact that he had referred to her as famous, as although Count Genonia himself was well known, she had never been active in social circles, making Alone's awareness of her all the more suspicious. In truth, Kalia was the true mastermind behind her household, secretly using black magic to control her father and effectively acting as the real head of the family. And the thought that Alone might know about this hidden truth filled her with unease, as no one else was supposed to be aware that her father had been reduced to a mere puppet. She recalled how Alone had mentioned that there were too many eyes on them, and she interpreted this as him having already discovered the spy she had sent to follow him. Just then, a servant hurried in to inform her that something was wrong, urging her to come and see it for herself. And when Kalia entered her room, she was met with the shocking sight of the very person she had sent after Alone lying dead. The servant explained that since the protective seal on the body had not been triggered, it meant no information had been leaked, but Kalia quickly realized something far more unsettling, concluding that whoever had killed him had deliberately returned the body to her room as a message. Growing increasingly frustrated, she began questioning how Alone could have uncovered her involvement so easily, further deepening the misunderstanding surrounding him. Meanwhile, at the grand halls of the Altio estate, Loria was seen walking through the silent corridors, her expression weighed down by exhaustion and disappointment. Her thoughts drifted into a storm of regret and realization, as Loria came to accept that Alone was not someone to be taken lightly, a man of the underworld whose cold, unreadable eyes reminded her of her own father, making it clear that he was someone she should never turn into an enemy. Once, he had seemed like her final lifeline, but she now understood that he would never accept a deal that offered him nothing but loss, especially when she herself had already been stripped of all her influence and resources by her cunning siblings, the eldest daughter Marlianne, the eldest son Tamalian, the second son Keeg, and the second daughter Pyrin. With nothing left to her name, Loria had survived only because of her father's lingering affection, but even that fragile support now felt uncertain and ready to disappear at any moment. As she wandered deeper into the estate, weighed down by despair, she quietly admitted to herself that she no longer knew what to do. But the moment she stepped further inside, the maids rushed toward her in a panic, their pale faces filled with fear as they urgently called out her name. Their trembling voices delivered shocking news, revealing that Pyron and Keeg had taken their own lives, leaving Loria frozen in place as disbelief overwhelmed her mind, unable to comprehend how those who were ruthless enough to harm their own family could end their own lives instead. Fear tightened around her heart as she desperately asked about Tamalian and Marlian, only to be led to an even more horrifying sight, where the two of them lay lifeless with their swords driven into each other's chests. Her body trembled uncontrollably as terror consumed her, her thoughts spiraling as she struggled to understand how such a tragedy could have unfolded so suddenly. Meanwhile, outside the Altair estate, Raiden was seen departing swiftly, a faint smirk forming on his lips as he quietly acknowledged the completion of his task. And in that moment, Loria recalled Alone's earlier words that had vaguely hinted that something good would soon happen, causing a chilling sense of dread to run through her entire body. A sudden realization struck Loria, as she understood that the true mastermind behind the Count's household, the one who had patiently hidden his intentions while waiting for the perfect moment, had finally acted, and that everything unfolding now was exactly what had been implied. Overnight, she had become the sole successor of the ducal family, and a bitter laugh escaped her lips as she questioned what kind of monstrous being she had unknowingly aligned herself with. Yet she also knew that there was no turning back anymore, as those who had opposed or betrayed him had already met horrifying ends. Reminding herself that she had chosen this path, she steeled her resolve, accepting that she would walk it no matter how dark it became, and with that, a firm determination filled her eyes. 2 months later, a grand gift arrived at the Palancho estate addressed specifically to Alone, and upon seeing it, Yeben was left stunned as he recognized it to be a bottle of Cernant's wine, an incredibly rare and luxurious drink worth an immense fortune. He expressed his disbelief at seeing such a treasure, while Alone, upon reading the accompanying letter, realized that the sender was not Duke Altia, but Loria herself, indicating that she had personally prepared the gift. Confused, Alone wondered why she would send something like this to him, especially when he had failed to help her in her time of need, and the thought weighed heavily on his conscience. He turned to the servant to confirm whether the gift was truly meant for him, and the servant replied that it had been personally arranged and ordered for delivery by the Duke herself, a statement that caused Alone to pause as realization dawned on him that Loria had now ascended to the position of Duke. In the following scene, Loria was seen seated in her office, occupied with handling documents, and once she had finished her work, she leaned back and stretched slightly, quietly noting how quickly 2 months had passed, reflecting on how, after her father's death due to illness, she had formally taken his place through the succession ceremony, a reality that still felt surreal considering that not long ago, she had not even been allowed to step into that very office. Loria reflected that her siblings' deaths had come so suddenly, yet no one suspected her at all since she had a perfect alibi of attending the ball at the time. She remembered how her own secret organization had already been destroyed by her siblings, leaving her completely powerless when she returned to the mansion. Later, she came to understand how deeply Alone had calculated everything, as although he had declined her plea on the surface, he had perfectly cleaned everything up behind the scenes. This made her wonder just how far into the future he had planned all of this. Even though she had not informed him about her father's funeral because she did not want to trouble him, he still helped her, making it clear that he had some reason. He needed Loria for a part of his grand plan. Although she had successfully merged all subordinate organizations under Altia, she knew it still was not enough to match the immense power he hid behind his calm facade. This led her to conclude that Alone wanted something from her, as the distinguished figure of the underworld who had risen through sheer business prowess. Since the one thing Loria possessed that Alone did not was her ability to manipulate the political stage from the shadows, she realized that he needed the Altia name for now. Loria decided to focus on what she must do, while believing that the Distinguished One would contact her soon, and hoping that Alone would appreciate her gift of gratitude. As the scene shifted, Alone could be seen standing in his quarters while Loria's servant bowed before him, saying he would follow his lead. Yet Alone remained lost in thought, unable to process how Loria, who had once been on the verge of death, had now become the Duke, which did not sit right with him at all. Yeben silently observed his troubled expression, wondering what was wrong. As time passed over the next few months, the narration marked that all of this was happening 5 years before the original story even began. Yeben entered with visible excitement, calling out to Alone as the young master before quickly correcting himself and addressing him as the Count. Alone calmly replied that the succession ceremony had not yet taken place. However, since a year had already passed, he supposed it was fine to be called that. Despite saying so, he let out a quiet sigh as he thought to himself that he had never planned on becoming the Count. Still, since he had already adjusted to the role, he decided he would make the most of his noble status and use it to his advantage. In that moment, Yebin handed him a letter, saying it had arrived from Yusha. Alone responded with a thoughtful hum as he accepted it, and asked if any information had been uncovered about the assassins who killed Leo. As the two walked into the library and took their seats, Yebin replied that nothing had been revealed yet, as the Information Guild was still investigating and they would need more time. After that, he looked at Alone with curiosity and asked what his next goal would be, assuming that revenge was no longer his intention. The two then sat in silence within the Grand Library, while Alone sank into deep thought. He realized that all the slight differences from the original game were likely butterfly effects caused by his own actions. Upon accepting this, he decided that he would simply prepare himself for any unexpected events that might come his way. Yebin, observing him, remarked that he suddenly sounded like a real count. Alone casually brushed it off, but his curiosity soon shifted back to the letter he had received. He wondered what Yusha had written this time. As he opened the letter and began to read, Yusha had written warmly, asking if he had been well and mentioning that as always they were all doing fine and that everyone was pursuing their own hobbies. Daya's puppet shows had now reached a professional level, while Solon spent her days playing and learning with her friends. Renee quietly passed her time reading books and creating things, and Raiden had even developed a new hobby of tending to his garden. As Alone read through the letter, a gentle smile naturally spread across his face. The routine of exchanging news every month had become something familiar and precious to him, warming his heart more with each letter he received. Even though he had never seen their faces, simply knowing that they were all growing well brought him a deep sense of contentment that he could not hide. But in that moment, a sudden realization struck him as he thought about it further. The five of them were no longer children anymore. Yebin, noticing his expression, responded to his thoughts by saying that they were already ready to step out into society, with some of them even leaving the orphanage earlier than expected, as the ones Alone had once ordered to be saved had now reached that age. Hearing this, Alone realized that the five from the orphanage were no longer the small and fragile children they once were, but had truly grown up. With that, he quietly acknowledged that it was time to let them go. Yebin seemed slightly surprised and reminded him that he had gathered them all in one place because they had been wounded. But Alone calmly reasoned that there was no need for that anymore, as the time had come to release them. He thought to himself that he had done enough to ensure that they would not awaken as the deadly sins, and because of that, they should now be fine. Yebin agreed with this conclusion, noting that since they were all in good health, it was time to move forward. As the conversation settled, Alone's thoughts drifted toward his knowledge of the original game, where each boss battle had a rough outline of its setting revealed through narration. Yusha possessed the talent of faith, Deus had the talent of the sword, Renee had the talent of studying, Solon had the talent of a fighter, and Raiden had the talent of an apostle. Alone believed that if they used their talents in the right fields, they would surely thrive. This thought filled him with satisfaction as he mentally declared it a perfect plan. Feeling determined, he decided that while he was at it, he should also prepare a gift for each of them. He had planned on giving them gifts anyway, and now seemed like the right time. As evening arrived, his work for the day finally came to an end. Yebin stretched in relief and mentioned that he would step out for a while before returning soon. Alone waved him off and bid him farewell. Alone in the quiet office, Alone smiled to himself and wondered if he might one day receive something in return once they became successful and influential. His thoughts softened as he hoped his letters would guide the children to step confidently into the world. Meanwhile, in another scene, Yusha received Alone's new letter. Gathering everyone around, she informed them that new orders had arrived. This time, however, the message had been delivered to each of them individually. The group grew silent as they read their respective letters with focused expressions. Solon could not contain her excitement and eagerly unfolded her letter, marking the beginning of another chapter in their intertwined fates. Meanwhile, Yusha finished reading the letter sent by Alone and conveyed to everyone that new orders had arrived. This time, the instructions had been delivered individually, which surprised all the members. Before proceeding further, Yusha suggested that they should also review the previous letter since the new instruction appeared to require a high level of attention. Solon, still energetic, noted that only Yusha had previously read the earlier letters. Yusha clarified that since each of them had now been given a personal order, it meant it was time for everyone to see the contents themselves. The letter written by Alone caused the seal to react, and the other sins responded with visible curiosity. Solon then clumsily went through the opening line of the message that Alone had written, reflecting on its meaning rather than speaking it aloud. Renee initially dismissed the exchange as nothing more than idle conversation. Yet Yusha's faint smile revealed a deeper understanding of Alone's intent, recognizing that the simplicity of his opening was deliberate and calculated. Beneath that calm introduction lay his first true command, one that outlined targets for elimination, assigned precise roles, and demanded reports upon completion, marking a turning point in his authority over them. It was also in that moment that he entrusted Blue Moon to her, a gesture that made it clear he had personally selected each of them, a fact that stirred quiet excitement among the Sins who had yet to meet him. Deus acknowledged the logic behind such caution, noting how it reduced the risk of sensitive information leaking, while Yusha, recalling her own first mission, felt a flicker of satisfaction at how firmly she had been instructed to understand and execute without failure. As the group reflected, Deus briefly considered whether approaching alone directly might be more effective than relying on magical communication, a thought Raiden subtly supported by pointing out the oddity of using letters if secrecy was paramount. That moment of doubt was quickly cut off by Yusha's sharpened gaze, her unwavering focus reminding them that their purpose was not to question but to obey, her grip tightening around the letter as if reaffirming her loyalty. With a quiet sigh, Deus shifted the conversation back to the task at hand, urging everyone